This is another test run. Let's see if it works this time. Bill Hansen here for Juan Cristóbal. I have been so busy in recent months that I don't think I'll ever get around to answering your questions about my relation with Eduardo Hamuy. So I thought the way to sort of get over this once and for all is to make a dictation, put it on a CD, and mail it to you. So I'm going to begin by answering the questions of why Eduardo went to US in the first place. Eduardo wanted to marry Teresa Pinto, and there were a lot of objections in Teresa's family about her marrying an Arab. But about this time, Teresa got a Rockefeller Foundation fellowship to study neurophysiology with Professor Woolsey at in Baltimore. And Eduardo thought, well, if when she goes to the United States, he'll go to the United States too. The only difficulty is that he needed some kind of an income to live there while Luisa was doing her while Teresa was doing her research. Now we enter with Eduardo's mother. Eduardo's mother had a factory making nails and screws, and she got some dollars from the Corporación de Fomento to import production machinery, particularly screw machines. So Eduardo went more as an employee of his mother's factory to the U.S. to buy the screw machines, and then in order to get closer to Teresa, he went to New York City and lived in the International House at Columbia University, although he did not attend any classes. But he did do some research there, and some research that was fairly dangerous. Namely, he was studying the Puerto Rican teenage gangs in New York City. And at the same time, he had another side project about the what happened to the Spanish language of the Puerto Ricans as they absorbed English words in New York City. So anyway, at weekends, Eduardo could take a train to Baltimore to be with Teresa, and that went on for a year. And at that time, Professor Woolsey took a position at the University of Wisconsin, and also took all of his postdocs and graduate students along with him. So for Teresa moved then to Wisconsin, and so Eduardo more or less followed her to Wisconsin. Eduardo then went to the Department of Rural Sociology in Madison and became a visiting professor in the department. The department was headed by Professor Sewell, and he was engaged in a very large-scale project of studying social adjustment of primary school children. And Eduardo gave a few lectures about his work in New York City, and then he started working on a project with with a graduate student, Ellen Bogan, studying the Mexican migratory workers, agricultural workers, and particularly how these migratory workers survived in the severe climate of Wisconsin in the wintertime. Now we get to how it came about that I met Eduardo. At this time I was in my last year toward my chemistry degree, and I had a summer job working in the medical school as a photographer. And while doing some work for Professor Woolsey, I met Teresa, and through Teresa I met Eduardo. And so we had got together several times, and at this time I discovered that they were having quite a bit of difficulty living there in Wisconsin because neither of them knew how to cook, and they were sort of living in restaurants, which they couldn't really afford. So what happened next is I would go to their apartment every day at dinner time and cook the dinner for them. And that way I would get a free dinner, which was quite important for me because I was not eating very regularly because I didn't have the money to do it, because I was taking a full course in in chemistry, and at the same time I had to find some work in order to get a living because I had no support from home. And anyways, you see what that led up to over time is the fact that I became more or less of a family member of the Hamuy enterprise. After I graduated in chemistry, I made a request to the chemistry department for a research assistant position in graduate school, which I did not get, and I did not have the money to go to another university. However, at this time, Professor Sewell heard about me through Eduardo, and he offered me a summer job as doing a statistical analysis of his giant uh, study that he was doing of social adjustment of children. Well, fortunately, the University of Wisconsin was the first university in the world, really, to have a computer service for all the researchers in the university, and had gotten a computer set up, a computer, what very original one called the CPC. And so I got all this data from their uh, research with the children, and sort of applied some very high-powered statistics, particularly factor analysis, to this data, which impressed Professor Sewell very much. Although there were no real variables in there, and the result of the factor analysis was more or less a set of random numbers. The sociologists were very happy with that kind of work by the idea of using statistics like from quantum mechanics to apply just to social data. And of course, this kind of a discussion with Eduardo about this work that I was doing with the statistics of for Professor Sewell, that we both agreed that this was really a very strange kind of thing, because after all, a completely unquantifiable variable like social adjustment subjected to mathematical analysis didn't really make very much sense. And we thought very much about how one would do a serious sociological study. And it was about this time that Eduardo got some news from Chile about the Department of Education, the Ministry of Education in Chile, announcing publicly that in Chile about 40% of the people were illiterate, which of course was a completely senseless comment to make, but they had the data to support the fact that more than 40% of the people never finished the second grade, which again was a very curious result. Now this discussion we had about Professor Sewell's work and sociology research in general was that how would one go about making a really serious sociological study without any of these non-quantifiable variables, and specifically examining this case of the 40% uh, illiterate, which was clearly ridiculous because people just didn't know illiterate people in Chile. Well, after I got rejected in graduate school in chemistry, Professor Sewell got me to enroll in his department, and to get a degree in sociology. So I did the research there with the sociology, and at the same time uh, kept these very close relations with Eduardo. And through all these discussions, we decided how one would do a study related specifically to this statement of the Ministry of Education, to actually look at what the educational career was of the primary school children in Chile. And so as these discussions went on, the scope of the project kept getting bigger and bigger. And Eduardo said, well, we've got you've got all this knowledge of the statistical analysis and using with the mechanically, and we can sort of apply that to a project in Chile. So, but at this time, Eduardo had to go back to Chile. This was in 1951, and I said, well, if you were able to set up any kind of a useful institute in Chile, when I graduated in '52, I will join you. So that was the agreement that we made. Now things were not so, so straightforward as we expected. First of all, they didn't really have very much money in Chile, so they asked would I take a tramp steamer that was one of the nitrate boats that would take me to Chile, uh, to Iquique, and that would save the $550 it would cost to go by boat or by plane to Chile. And I said, oh sure, I would agree with that. And of course that turned out to be a colossal mistake. It turned out to be a real mess. In the end product, the ship that I took was completely different. Instead of leaving from Virginia, it left from Texas, from Galveston, Texas, and 3 months late. And then the voyage was very primitive. The food on the ship was inevitable. It took 40 days to get to where it was going, and where it was going was not Chile. It was going to Buenos Aires. And I arrived eventually at Buenos Aires pretty well starved because the food was unedible on the boat. And when I got to Buenos Aires, I discovered that this was the world center of corruption. The captain of the ship had to pay 500 cartons of cigarettes just to get the port pilot to bring the boat in. When I got on the boat, they said, no, you can't get off because you don't have a visa. But you don't need a visa. Well, that's okay. We still, una multa de 10,000 nacionales de oro, which is something, fabulous about some money, completely ridiculous. And so Eduardo showed up in Buenos Aires and saw me on the boat, but I couldn't get off. And he went to the Chilean embassy, and it turns out that there was no Chilean ambassador in Chile, because the Secretary of Peron wanted a big bribe to accept his papers. And so they went on negotiating, and eventually the Chilean university paid a huge fine to get me off the boat. It was a very awful waste of money. But anyway, we eventually got to Chile. Now, since in Wisconsin, I was practically a family member. In Chile, I moved into the apartment of Eduardo in downtown Santiago for some time while I was looking for an apartment for myself. And so we started out with our research. But the thing to me which was really spectacular is what Eduardo had accomplished in that 1 year. It was really miraculous. He'd gotten this fantastic house adjacent to Pedagogico, had got a secretary, he got some graduate students, he got money to send two colleagues, Samuel and Godoy, to Europe for advanced study. And he had very good support from the decano, Juan Gomez Mias, and that was all very helpful, and the thing was just a functioning machine when I got there. So immediately we could start planning out how we would actually do all this study, what provinces we would select, and so on. And after some arranging all this, we decided all the mechanism we were going to use. But then, of course, we needed some more money, first of all, because it was getting to be a very large scale project, and we needed to get IBM machines for tabulating this data, and we needed to get print up a lot of IBM cards, and I guess we needed a vehicle of some kind so we could help collecting the libros de matricula that we got from all the schools in these provinces. And at this time, Gomez Mios now was the rector of the university, and he again came through and got us some support so we could go ahead with this project. And so we got all the things organized, and we found that being next to the School of Education, the students had to have memoria, and they all needed a project of some kind, so they would contribute their time to recording in all this data that we were collecting about all the different schools in the 4 provinces that we picked. And all we had to give them was tea and cookies every day, and so as you can imagine, it was like a circus with lots of activity and was going on. All of my contribution was to doing the mechanical part of the thing, and analyzing all this data and tabulating it and so on. And only field work I did is some reason I was assigned to Concepcion, and with 3 other students, we went to Concepcion in the middle of the winter, as you can imagine what the weather was like, to collect the libro matricula from every school in the province. Fortunately, one of the students was from Concepcion, and her father was the commander of the Chacabuco regiment there, and he was able to get us a jeep. So we had a jeep that we could run around in Concepcion, and then in a month we collected all the data except for one little remote place called the Comuna of Santa Maria, which was a very small population, but we were never able to penetrate that, at least in the winter time. So that was my only contribution to the field work. So anyway, things went on perfectly well. We got a bunch of students, graduate students, doing work and tabulating all this data, and by that time, well, in the meantime, in the 1954, I got married to Luisa Fernandez, who was doing research in cosmic ray physics, which I found very adventurous and enjoyable compared to sociology. And by 1955, all the work that I had to do was finished, and all I had to do now was to write up all this data and publish it. And so I imagined in a month or so after I left that would be done. However, before I left, the colleagues from Europe, Samuel and Godoy, returned to the institute, and it was very clear that they had no interest at all in what they called Eduardo's project. So, started some fiction, and of course, I wasn't there to observe it. I left. I went to Berkeley, and I went to Berkeley because that was the world best place to study cosmic ray physics for Luisa, and I had no further interest in sociology, and I went for a degree in electrical engineering, working half-time on the computer center in the university. And now why it took 6 years to publish this data was very strange, because it really decreased the value of the thing tremendously. It should have been published right away, and also it should have been published mostly in foreign journals, so it would be more widely read, because as far as I know, it's a very rare sociological study that all had real data, and working with Eduardo was just fabulous. He was such a tremendous organizer, and the way he gets things done and they get done, and that's something that was very, very attractive. I was sort of disappointed in the fact that really, after all this work, the publication took so long, and it was really not all complete because, first of all, the institute apparently started falling apart. Salcedo got money for a fellowship, and he went to study abroad to the U.S. And about the only one that was left that was really interested and serious about this project was Briones, but that was about the only real help he had, and I guess that's where it took the 6 years to get the thing published. But anyway, I was no longer involved in this or even or even interested in it. In any event, so I was more or less a family member of the Hamuys, and throughout all of our remaining lives, we were all very close friends, and we had vacations together. And we would travel there and live with them, and they would travel here, and so it was always very close relationships. And in 1961, uh, Teresa had another fellowship to study at neurophysiology at Stanford University for 2 years, and so again, Eduardo joined her, but also he brought his daughter and his mother, and they all went to Palo Alto, and they were all living together there. And Eduardo went to the university in Berkeley and gave some lectures there. And while he was there, he got contacted by the Immigration Service and said they had discovered that when he was a student leader in Chile, he was a communist. So they revoked his visa and wanted to expel him from the country. Eduardo got in contact with a law school professor in Berkeley who took over Eduardo's case and was able to get Eduardo to stay and finish there his 2 years in Palo Alto and Berkeley. And just to show you the kind of way Eduardo operates, this particular law professor, a couple of years later, was named the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. So he made some good contacts. Now we'd always periodically travel to Chile, and whether we had a lot of Luisa had a lot of relatives there, and we stayed with the Amuis, and periodically they would come to the U.S. again, and we would all get together and travel together and so on. So we maintained a close relation with these people all the time. And after they passed away, we continued with the same relationship with the daughter, Teresita, and in fact later this year we're going to go and stay with them on their Fundo Pocachay in Chile. Now I think this is enough data for whatever you would want about Eduardo, and what I'm going to do is make a CD, auto CD, and mail it to you. And so what you need to do is to give me a good mailing address where I can send this CD so you can have this information. Thank you.